So hello everyone, everybody who is looking at us, who is looking through this online option and who is joining us from hopefully all over the world. It's a celebration today because we are celebrating the end or the culmination of the very first semester of Cēsu University, Cēsu Pluriversitāte, what we call semester number 0. And we started actually with a lecture in English by Alberto Di Gennaro, and we are finishing this the very first 0 semester by amazing Tīna Alise Drupa, and she will explain everything in details by herself. Some additional formal information. Worry not, this is not the last lecture. This is the last of semester 0 lectures. We will kick off in mid-August with the very first Cēsu University summer school. So follow the news. And also we are doing this lecture in English for one simple reason. We want to launch and communicate the fact that Cēsu University won't be based upon one language. And we are ready to explore the possibilities that's laying ahead of us by doing lectures in many languages as well. So today English, maybe next day Esperanto, hopefully Latin, maybe some ancient Greek as well sometimes. Who knows? I think it's also very important not to focus on one mean of communication. By that I mean one particular language. Also not only Latvian. Tīna will talk about human ecology, and I think if there is an amazing platform or way of thinking about what's happening in the world that human ecology implies, supports, imports, and enables that thinking, if we see what's happening around the globe in natural systems impacted by human operations, and especially at the moment in the States, what's happening in artificially built systems as cities, I think human ecology and the way we interact with our inner and outer worlds, environments, natural, social, built, you name it, is very, very important. So that's it. Enjoy the lecture. Hopefully there will be many questions after the lecture. There will be short or maybe even long or whatever time it will take, question and answer session. Enjoy your day, enjoy your morning, enjoy your night. I don't know, maybe someone's from Australia looking at us, and who knows. Enjoy the lecture. Tīna, the stage is yours.
Thank you. So, welcome everyone. I want to thank for those who decided to join us, and I'm really pleased that I have this opportunity. So, before we start further, I want to start with a small grounding, and especially because we're not everyone in the same physical space, and I think it can be useful to go in with the right intention and a mindset. So, I would encourage everyone, for those who feel comfortable, to close your eyes, and if not, just rest them and just take a deep breath in. And while you're taking this breath in, feel the calmness going through your body and let all the thoughts and worries of the day out with the breath. Take a breath in again and out. Welcome positive energy and open mind to enjoy this time and being here now, and take last deep breath and open your eyes whenever you feel comfortable. And I just want to say shortly why I think it's important. First of all, I made a promise to myself that I would want to start a lecture or a gathering like that, because we have so many things in our lives, and when we come together, I think it's just a service we can do for ourselves to be more present and engaging and listening. So today we're talking about a landscape and learning through landscape, and the landscape that I was exploring, researching, just being in, was in Dārziņi. It's it's a neighborhood in Riga, which is in one side surrounded by a highway and the other side with a river. And that's just a small kind of a location and context where it is. And here we can see just a side view of the video. Well, so creating a lecture about a landscape, the task came with just a landscape being as a learning environment, and coming to Latvia and starting with these limitations that we are currently in and that were placed at that time also shaped what kind of landscape I chose and how I approached it. Because I think, first of all, in order to talk about a landscape or a place, which I think are closely related because all landscapes have to be placed somewhere, it kind of naturally fell into that it was going to be this place because that's the place where my family house is, and then that's where I could go and explore and be constantly in. And also, I think it's a challenge because I think it's a learning lesson and encouragement for all of us to do and go into our surroundings that are familiar us, because familiarity brings an interesting component to the whole idea, because I think it's easy to be so familiar to the surroundings that you kind of don't see differences or miss some points when, for example, recently we were in my countryside and we saw a well that's right in front of when you go in. And we noticed that something is different, but you really cannot tell what exactly was it, because it's a well, you know how it looks, but something was different. And we asked, and it turned out that some of the wood was just a bit higher than usual when it was changed. And that's just a small example of how that could be scaled up and we don't notice, and kind of familiar landscape maybe is part of routine, and you don't ask the questions. As Agnes has said, I will take a sip. As Agnes has said, when you go to a new place, there are so many questions and they just happen naturally because this environment is so fresh and new. So therefore I want to talk about a familiar place and a landscape that we could try to find these ways how to engage with it differently. So a landscape in general, as a concept, I will not try to define it in one way, but I definitely see there's a relationship that people have commonly, and seeing it something as distant, and maybe the frame itself that we often associate is it with picturesque and a painting, and that kind of distance it. And also for myself, I felt that I had to take that away and maybe choose something else that is more active and something that I can apply myself. So I thought of seeing landscape through a magnifying glass, where when you take, you already are active to interact. What can you do with a magnifying glass? For example, when you put it on a leaf, you suddenly see all these structures and lines that go through it. So that's kind of a starting process where we can see a landscape as more something exploratory than distant. So today, Janis mentioned that I'm going to talk about human ecology, but I think before I start as human ecology, what it is in itself, I have to go back of why someone goes to that kind of education and chooses. Well, I'm from Latvia, and I grew up. I spent my childhood in Kurzeme, in Talsi, and more in the Dundaga region, and then I was schooled in Riga. But then I was presented with an opportunity to study in the United World College, which was in Netherlands. And this is an opportunity where, through scholarship, people were brought all around the world together and opened a lot of questions and insights of the world that I would not be able to see. And suddenly I had these new values and a way of seeing life, and I knew that at that age of choosing university, I felt that I might be pushed in a ways that I would not want to go, because there were values that were so new, or thoughts, and I felt that I could be probably pressured into applying to what, I don't know, the general society wants. So my search in university was based on finding the environment and the way people want to study. It wasn't really specifically what was taught, but how it was shared. So human ecology, and as a major in the College of Atlantic in the US, just came as a perfect solution. And it creates the place where people can explore through different ways of gaining information, the way they want to think, and become stronger in different way of thinking. And I think a lot of youth today are kind of forced maybe into adapting where the stream of the general culture is going, and I think that's a big reason why I think Cēsu Pluriversitāte is so amazing, because it's also thinking about those teachings in different ways. So the landscape and human ecology is quite a natural way of talking of those two things together, because it's basically a playground for human ecologists, if you want to say so. So I'm going to start further a bit more to explain human ecology as a term. For those who are confused a bit, ecology, because eco and all these terms are used so many places. Basically, quite recently, not really in the 19th century, there was a zoologist that created kind of this, was one of the first who shared this, and it means that to study the relationship between the biota, the life, and the physical surroundings. And if we look at the Greek explanation, it's oikos, home or place to live, and logos, the study. So we can see how this is the study kind of home and the relationships, just to start understand more and not confuse. And also I want to say that this explanation of human ecology or insights is through my experience, and I will tell further and more why it is important to always emphasize that it is personal, even if we want to share it as something generic. And so also human ecology has been shared in or applied in sociology, geography, anthropology, but I think in the way that I have studied it, I kind of think that it has limited human ecology and how we see it to put it into some specific fields. And one of the previous professors in the College of Atlantic, where I study, he compared human ecology to chess and the figure of queen. I'm not a chess player, but I really like the comparison, and I thought it was a great way to introduce it. Well, when the chess was created, there was not a queen was added only later. While players were enjoying the game, there were rising difficulties with the strategies that were applied, and in order to make the game more enjoyable or just continue with the strategies, and the queen was introduced, and by combining the moves of rook and bishop. And he compares this combining aspect to human ecology, where there are these rising difficulties that humanity faces with understanding our environments and how we interact with it, that there needed to be a new field or a new inquiry to explain these things. So I see a lot of parallels in a way of Cēsu Pluriversitāte and College of Atlantic, where I study human ecology, because it was a place where people wanted to find new ways to study and find new meaning of where the starting point is. And one of the things is that human ecology on its own is motivated by care and concern for the future, and these two things interact with each other when you try to study or apply human ecology. So there's this understanding that you want to build about the world from the different perspectives. However, there's always respect that you want to keep, and this responsibility to the world and to our environments and each other as a community. Agnes in the last lecture mentioned the passion, and that's also one of the things that it doesn't really matter. Not everybody has to be an ecologist or a designer to, well, let's keep that. Not everybody has to be in one field in order to be a world changer. It's actually the passion you need to find and combine it with intellect, guided through this critical thinking and informing yourself from different reasons. And probably you also need creativity. And with this combination, really wonderful things through your education can happen. One that links to landscape, which is interesting, and somehow I feel full that I didn't think about it. But in order to really engage in the world and create these relationships and understandings, the education is going to be locally based and focused. So when I wanted to study geology in the US, of course it was about the Mount Desert Rock, the island, and I guess the passion or the relationship for that landscape was not there. And that's also how my interests were shaped there, because in order to learn, you have to go out there in the landscape and study. And that kind of was the funny thing about searching for that kind of education, but ending up disappointed that it's about somewhere else in the world where there's not this personal connection. Well, moving on and kind of summarizing about human ecology, you can see that this is not about one thing to study, but how you apply it or how you study it is about the meta skills, the skills which you create in your mind and how you work with others. Of course, when you apply them, there are physical and real world changes that happen, but these skills in the mind are really important. And when I talk about unlearning through landscape, of course you cannot change the landscape just for learning. You have to, that's the other side, you have to change what is how you're approaching it in your head with your thoughts. So when we go further into the presentation, we're gonna see that. So in a bigger picture, human ecology is this, they see the world as one big whole that interacts complexly, and there are these components that are dynamically working with each other, and only when we understand or at least acknowledge these different parts and these boundaries also to what we can do and what we can understand, then we are maybe talking about something more honest that we can do to the world and what we can bring forward. So further, we're gonna open up a bit how to maybe create these understandings or understand yourself better to engage in different ways. So Bonnie Tai and Heather Lakey are two professors who I'm gonna refer to of what I have described human ecology. One of them refers to human ecology as habits of being. So we have habits that we do in the morning, how we eat breakfast, but these habits can be also applied to education, of how we learn, how we see the world. So while you study human ecology, it's not only for the formal education or academics, it's about a way of being. So for me, education and learning is not only about studying, but it's actually choosing, thank you, it's actually choosing a way you want to live or engage with this world in. And we can break these things down in starting with different perspectives, plural perspectives of what we can hold. And this is the starting point where you can apply yourself with different kinds of knowledge. But in order to do that, you have to have this ability in your mind to work with this knowledge and thoughts. So you can call it as cognitive flexibility, your ability in your mind to organize these thoughts and at the same time apply and understand something that maybe doesn't align with your own values. And third, and I think that's also something that is really important, is to recognize our own biases, our own limitations that we can bring to when we share something, what I mentioned before, that it's my perspective, and of course I'm referring to other people and maybe it's shared knowledge, but we have our own limitations as humans, and it doesn't mean that it's less valuable knowledge or less truthful. It just means that that's the way humans are, and maybe that's a ground that we should more often start from, the personal interests or some of how our knowledge is formed. So our conversation model about human ecology or applying human ecology is going to be landscape. And one of the first elements that you already see here, that I'm going to play again, are fences. And I think it's just really, in a landscape like this, where it's a mostly residential area for a little, only 2 other stores there, one park. Fences are really a strong landscaper, landscaping as a verb. It shapes around how the land is shaped. So it seems pretty obvious, but I think it's an interesting aspect that the landscape itself kind of carries this quality of changing the environment, because when you choose to plant, for example, lilac, it's gonna maybe be across by the fence, and how we organize our inside of this little property where you live is also shaped by the borders of the fence. But at the same time, the shared fence along the sides, you're suddenly a neighbor, and that's a completely something, a different kind of aspect to it. And also here, it's not that you break down, when you're inside of your house, it feels that you're really separated by this fence. But when you step outside, you can see that everything kind of is connected through this one fence that goes along, and you're not really alone. And at the same time, I want to mention Vladimir Kudoraju, who lived in Dārziņi, I think all his life, but he started living in the 60s. And he was a man that hated fences. He didn't want a fence, his house didn't have a fence, and also the property that led to his house in the garden, that was not his, he thought that he should make it more beautiful and and bring in features that would create a beautiful path to his own garden. And with his own resources, in 30 years he created a park, a little garden where it's his life work. And that's also just a different way of seeing when somebody has a strong belief that you shouldn't divide mine, yours, and it also doesn't apply to land. This is something that can be created, and it's really beautiful, and I think more people should know it, because I didn't know the story behind until I just noticed the sign that this park has a name and just Googled it. So this is one example of maybe trying to apply different perspectives. And I think there's a way of guiding it, or at least breaking it down. And it's looking at ways of knowing. And this will be my contribution to Helmut's, which is not based in history of philosophy, but I think the ways of knowing are really important. And I will refer to it through theory of knowledge, which I studied in the Netherlands, and a lot of people who, if they're some of my friends who also studied, will know it as a subject and not really enjoying it. However, I think it really comes in if you apply it naturally, then it can be fun and a helpful and playful way to operate through your mind, or just see where your thoughts come from. And so they have broken down it in language, memory, emotion, reason, sense perception, faith, intuition, and imagination. So when we actually think that knowledge can be acquired through so many different ways, it completely also changes maybe what we should study in university, or maybe we should value more different ways of learning, of engaging and going for a walk, or just talking about that. I'm just trying to get across that this, I don't know, that it shouldn't only be one person always sharing knowledge, or we should really experience learn through different ways. And so for Dārzini, I try to apply some of the ways of knowing. Of course, they always work all together and interconnected, but I thought it would be helpful to emphasize one and bring forward. And one of them is language. And of course, there are linguistics, and there's a lot of weight in language. And I thought in Dārzini, language was interesting part of the landscape, because that was a way that the history, or how the landscape before was perceived or used, or the features were brought in, because you can see it through the street names. And the street names, my house is on the Dandelion Street. There's a Lilac Street, Tomato Street. So these are features of landscape that people just saw as a mark, as a pattern, as something important. At the same time, you could see that there were features of fishing communities, and some words that I even know. For example, tatsis, which means it's a barrier in the river for fish catching. And there's also ragata, which is a tool in the water to move wood. And these are traces that are left only through some landmarks in the physical landscape next to the Daugava. However, these names carry the story of what it was before. And also the river itself is a really important landscape feature that I will talk also a bit later. But this relationality of something that it's physically maybe not considered that Daugava is a part of Dārziņi, but it's definitely one of the main symbols that people would refer to when they talk about the landscape. So the connection of something that when something is right next to it and how it actually brings patterns in the landscape itself. The next one I want to talk about is in combination memory and motion. This is really a personal landscape to me because there's my family house. But when I think about it, what I know in the past, what I knew about it in the past, there were not really positive emotions, or I connected emotion and memory because I think a lot of memories are connected through feeling when we remember them. And I think there's a lot of fear that was there, and connecting with danger and unsafety, because this landscape is messy and it's not organized or cleaned up perfectly. And in these garden house properties, there's a lot of time and just relics that are left there, and in most people it brings some kind of uncomfortability. And at the same time, there are also people like this. I would not be encouraged to walk alone around there when I was younger, because if there are parts of the landscape like this, you would meet people who would reflect the same. Homeless people, people of hard paths of life, substance addicts, and you kind of learn to avoid them and connect to emotion that, I don't know, you can even feel turned away or disgusted. And I think, and it's when today I think of through reason or the education that I had, I see it differently, and these people have not fit in the standards of the society today, and have fallen into the gaps of where if you go, you kind of are put aside and not cared for. And it's really hard to be in these parts of the systems and the broken parts where if you don't have a home, then if you don't have family, nobody's gonna help you. And I think those kind of people that you're associate these features find similar landscape. So it's an interesting thing where when humans are associated with some kind of associated, they kind of find similar landscapes where the homeless will not be homeless again, and these features kind of bring those together. So the point is that through using some other ways of knowing, for example, reason, we can inform our memory about that this emotion that's coming forward, it's maybe not the right way to do it. So it's okay to feel this emotion that comes first, but you can relearn and unlearn these kind of feelings through informing yourself. I think sense perception is something beautiful also, how Agnese referred to it through painting, and how when we really engage with sense, we can, this will come later, we can really also find things about the landscape that we wouldn't see through our eyes. So this more of a sensescape. So with sound, you can hear in Dārziņi a lot of construction sounds, mowing the yarn or cutting metal. So you can know that people are working with hands and working with the land, and there's this relationship that you would not know unless you would go to every backyard and see what they're doing. But you can hear these patterns through sound. Of course, there are other, but I will move to smell. I wouldn't say Darzini is a place, or let's say a landscape, landscape that smells good, because in certain days there will be wind that comes in and brings the smell of landfill from Getlini, or then when it's the weekend, people you can walk through and there's always smell of meat grilling. That's sometimes really overwhelming, but again, you can see that people come here to spend time together and connect through food. But I think one of the most interesting smells, and that reflects a culture that I'm more fascinated now than I was before, is the smell of fire burning, burning smell basically. And I will say, I use word in Latvian, so in the Darzini there's essential of čuguna muca. You need to have a barrel and where you burn your waste and everything that you don't need. And I promise at least once a day you walk through and smell fire somewhere around. And I think it brings interesting aspects of it in. One is how people practice waste disposal. Second, relationship with open fire, this is illegal in other countries. And I don't know, in other ways that it comes in your house, if you forget to close your windows, you have to kind of change your behavior, because you have to make sure, okay, maybe there's someone who's going to burn something, so don't keep the window open, or the clothes can soak in the burn. Maybe there's some romanticism that could be there. And I also thought that in one of the backyards there are even 5 of barrels, and it kind of created its own landscape as I don't know, walk-through museum. And well, yeah, this is, even we can be happy that, or maybe we can consider it as a good practice that there's less pressure on the mainstream waste system, that people are finding ways how to get rid of their own unnecessary things. Still, it's a linear approach, and there could be other ways of approaching this problem. And this is one way how a global problem of waste and our material management in general reflects in a local scale. And so let's see what's next. Oh yeah, so you can see a bit of how that plays out visually in a landscape. So it's a smell which comes strongly, but it's something also visual. So this complexity that I'm talking about through these different perspectives, it's our built technological and cultural and biophysical environments that work together with us humans and the planet. And it's really complex, and I think we have to recognize sometimes that it's unfair, and I think it's disrespect to the world that we want to simplify things sometimes, and there is this complexity that your mind is not able to grasp. And I think there are benefits why some people want to simplify aspects of the world, and there are people who benefit from it. At the same time, we cannot always think of all the aspects. I think then we would go mad if our mind would have to form these ways of thinking every time. So we have naturally in our minds mental models that allow us to prejudge situations, but through our ability to actually use cognitive flexibility and recognizing biases, we can do this unlearning. We can do this exploring in our mind and critically approach different situations. So that's kind of a way to work with complexities, or just ways of how we can be informed by the world and reshape these mental models. And So it's not only about recognizing these things, but wanting to change them for better, if you can see how, and finding ways to do that, or at least start a conversation and acknowledge it. So, and the connection with the landscape is that we work through it, and we shape it, starting from how we perceive it, and reflecting what we value, what we want to hide, what we kind of perceive as beautiful, and what we cherish. And I think one example that also shows that that I want to talk about is kintsugi. And this is an art practice that highlights imperfections in broken pieces. And I brought this today because my pottery came from the US and it was shattered. And first there was, of course, this, I didn't want to throw it away, but I also didn't see, or maybe fully, the beauty in it. And some of my friends and also Yanis suggested kintsugi, and I think it's interesting way how to compare the same object and something that happened to it, but perceived completely differently. I think Latvians have a saying even that you shouldn't keep broken dishware at home because it will bring unluck. And at the same time, that same event of something being broken and putting it together can be an art form and something meaningful that highlights that something should be brought back to life. And this cup, I guess, is actually a present of Cēsu Pluriversitāte logo on it that was supposed to come. So it's put back in pieces through this meaning of highlighting imperfections as a celebration. And at the same time, I think that can also be seen in a landscape where we kind of don't value always what's left there, old and worn down. And on the other side, this is actually interesting, I didn't put a photo in, but right aside there of this old historic building, of probably was one of the first buildings in Dārzini, are two completely new project, modern houses with these abstract angles and massive backyards with probably too many cars and just complete contrast. And so on the other side of the highway, there were similar small properties like this, but they were even less cared for and forgotten. And this was an easy way for industry to buy this land through probably some process of the municipality taking the land and then buying this land where you can build storage units, and really I think it brings out a sad part of our society where this land and landscape that is in a way was created for this relationship to be built with gardening and summer houses where you can spend time for the human side, now was so easily bought by these companies. And on the other side, there's not only 2 or 3, but 4 of these massive buildings being placed there. And that's kind of the question of today, of what do we choose to? Of course, it's more difficult to make alive something that is being forgotten, and how to give it a new breath, However, I don't think these kind of solutions are the ones that will play a good part to our future and to where we're heading right now. And I want to read a short passage or some pages from this book that I've been reading right now. It's called Braiding Sweetgrass, and it's by an author. She's a botanic scientist, and also she's an indigenous woman, and she brings highlights or reflections and observations of her own indigenous culture and science together and having discussion about these aspects. And since I'm talking about dārziņi, I found a chapter that, or it came to me about the relationship to gardens and what they actually mean. Of course, it's not sustaining us for all the prime food, but they have a really, I think, big value in our ways of life, and maybe we should cherish them more. So this is from a chapter, Empathy in the Beans. How do I show my girls I love them on the morning in June? I pick them wild strawberries. On February afternoon, we build snowmen and sit by the fire. In March, we make maple syrup. We pick violets in May and go swimming in July. On August night, we lay out blankets and watch meteor showers. In November, that great teacher, the woodpile, comes into our lives. That's just the beginning. How do we show our children our love? Each in our way, by a shower of gifts and heavy rain of lessons. I made my daughters learn to garden so they would always have a mother to love them long after I'm gone. The empathy in the beans. I spend a lot of time thinking about our relationship with land, how we are given so much and what we might give back. I try to work through the equations of reciprocity and responsibility, the ways and wherefores of building sustainable relationships with our ecosystems, all in my head, but suddenly there was no intellectualizing, no rationalizing, just the pure sensation of baskets full of mother love, the ultimate reciprocity, loving and being loved in return. I wonder if much of that ails our society stems from the fact that we have allowed ourselves to be cut off from the love and from the land. It is medicine for broken land and empty hearts. Of course, much of what fills our mouths is taking forcibly for the earth. That from of taking does no honor to the farmer, to the plants, or the disappearing soil. It's hard to recognize food that is mummified in plastic, bought and sold, and not as a gift anymore. Everybody knows you cannot buy love. A garden is a nursery for nurturing connection, the soil for cultivation of practical relevance, and its power goes far beyond the garden gate. Once you develop a relationship with a little patch of earth, it becomes a seed itself. So that was a little part of the book, and I would highly recommend, because it's a practice for myself, for ways of knowing and seeing a relationship with nature in a completely different way, and how it is shared with others. So we're moving towards the end. And the last part of the landscape that I want to talk about is the river Daugava. This is one of the sites you can see. And before I talk about the meaning of ending here, I think it's interesting of spending a lot of time there. You could notice that the water goes up and down quite in a big difference, and this is because right 2 kilometers away there's hydroelectric power station, and and I was trying to see the pattern of when it goes up and down, but it's really hard to observe it through your eyes, even if you go there often. So we know that the power is generated by floods, how the water changes, and also by the demand. But also the aspect that I found fascinating is that also the global market kind of detects how the water changes, because when the price is good, they will generate more electricity through the river and the water, and that will change in a landscape where the water ends and starts, and it's not visible in any other way than somewhere in the world the number of something of the price of the electricity goes up or down. And when the water goes lower, it opens up a side of the river that was covered with the water and shows kind of parts that have been left there by someone, or the flow of the water got it there. And when I saw this, I kind of thought of, there's this term sea combing, where you go through the seaside and you find different parts of maybe sea glass and other things that you would find by the shore. And this kind of opened in a similar way to look at these things as parts of humanity, of relics that maybe someone would find one day, and this is what they would see as the artifacts of Anthropocene. And I was thinking of like who would know the river the best and who would be able to share more knowledge. And I think that there would probably be a fisherman who sits there all day long and maybe not consciously making observations, but he's there, and I think the person would know much better than even someone who has studied rivers in general, and have insights that we would never know from anyone else. And I think that's also human ecology is about, by valuing not only the scholars or the ones who we picture as the intellectuals, but someone who does work in the land or fishes. And I think that in a way fishers probably are quite of romantics of enjoying nature outside. And I wanted to, for the last part, I wanted to bring to the river Andalgo. For those who are Latvian community, our Latvian community, it kind of has a collective memory for this river and an importance in history through written works and culture, through songs, of also in a way part of identity. But at the same time, for the global community, water and river especially symbolizes change and movement. And for the last part, I wanted to do an activity that kind of connects with two of the ways of knowing, of faith and imagination. And I think those are really important ways of knowing, because we need faith as a belief in something. If you want to do something in the world, you need to have the belief in the good and the will, and imagination to see how it could be different. And I think humans are remarkable in seeing how the future or speculating how the future could work out. So that's how we have got this far. So this last part I want to do is future visioning. I will, similarly as in the start, welcome you to close your eyes and do a bit of visioning. I will try to read slowly and hope you can follow. Close your eyes. Breathe in slowly, in and out. Imagine that all your thoughts are rolling off your head, shoulders, down your arms, and falling into the ground. Find a calm center inside of yourself. Breathe in and out slowly. You are awakening from a very restful nap and sleep with delightful dreams. As you awaken, you see a door in front of you. You go to the door and put the hand on the handle, but you pause. Anything can be possible on the other side. When you open the door and walk, you will be in the morning of June 2nd, 2050. As you open the door, there is a path that with each step brings you deeper in this world that is in 2050. Every step brings what you imagine. What do you see? Are there other people around you? How do they greet you? What is around you? How does the street look like? How do people move around? Where do you go to rest? To spend some time with friends and family? How does it smell there? What can you hear? What are the children doing? Where are people working? What do they feel while they're working? What are they wearing? What else do you hear? Animals, wind, engines, water. What else do you smell? Gardens, cooking, flowers. As the day comes to an end, you go home. How do you feel going there? What's around you? How do you spend your time at home? It's getting late and you need to rest. You lie down and relax. As you relax, your body and mind travels back to today. When you're ready, open your eyes and move your body so you're back today with us. I hope in any way you saw something, and it's okay whatever you saw. If you didn't see something that you want to be in the future, then there are ways to imagine something different. And if you saw something that you want and it's not here, it's time to start getting there and with all of us together. I think that's it for today. I don't know why I didn't play this, but this can play along. Yeah, that's where we end today with my small introduction to human ecology and a bit of this landscape and place.
Do you understand what you just did?
Close, then zero.
You just
Semester.
fucking blew the stage, Tīna. I wrote down in a Facebook that live feed where you can comment or ask questions that even the screen was glittering and shivering by this pure energy, and I strongly feel that there's material for at least 10 more lectures in what you said today, because it's almost impossible. It's like after reading a good story, you want to just sit and kind of contemplate. And as a matter of fact, you are the author. If you don't know, people, Tīna is the author of the reflections that actually binds together this whole idea of iteration by doing one lecture that builds upon another. That's the whole conceptual approach for the Cēsu University, to build the content, to build a narrative that's building itself. The story of Cēsu University is not about serving some sort of disciplines or serving the market needs. It is to serve the holy substances of university, to critically reflect what's around us. And I think you just did it brilliantly. And I have, I think, 4 or 5 full pages of questions and remarks. And the reflection about this lecture, I will write it because I owe you one. And you need to.
Thank you.
It's amazing job. And do you think you can be too familiar with the landscape or place? Because I don't want to miss that it's either Edward Ralph or Earl Casey, and one of those Edward's eds have amazing argument that if you become too familiar with a place, too bound to the place, you try to start even to defend that place, you can become also hostile for the others. Mm-hmm. There's a tricky situation in becoming too familiar with a place. So yeah, what do you think? Can you become too familiar with a place, and what does it imply?
I think that comes to the biases of the idea of your own bias, where, well, you could defend your place when you have this strong emotion and you feel that you know it, but that's maybe the entitlement of that others can know the place in a different way. Mm-hmm. And that doesn't diminish it in any way. So I don't know if there can be a way of knowing the place too well, because it always evolves. Mm-hmm. And as the time goes, the place changes, and then you again and again get to learn something that you will not know. So I think even if you know, there's always something that you could know more or in a different way.
Do you think that landscape as this set of relations in different scales, instantly and fundamentally and flowing, do you think landscape thinks as an entity? Or it happens to be just a result of our cognition and...
Well, maybe when we're in a landscape, it kind of can carry some kind of an energy or shape how we behave in there. So if you want to call it thinking from the landscape, or projecting something in you, how you behave, then maybe that it is thinking. But I don't know, I think if the landscape thinks, I think you do it together. Mm-hmm. With the landscape.
I also don't have an answer for that question. All I know is that I've been to several places around the world, and each time the specific distinct landscape is directly engaging with my thinking, and I feel that I almost think through that landscape. Mm-hmm. When I was in Cairo, for example, the first senscape of the city was the smell. Absolutely, and it's shisha, and then you kind of feel all those social material practices of the people, because the air is just filled with, and at that point, the naturality of that landscape actually is artificial, because shisha is a result of us smoking some I don't know, shisha. I think it's some sort of mixture of dried fruits and stuff. And while being down in Tasmania, actually where Jeff Malpass lives, and if you're interested in the most amazing way of thinking for place, as place, by place, thinking about place, please take a look, find Google Jeff Malpass, and especially his book he edited in 2017, The Intelligence of Place, where there are amazing essays about the importance of edges in a place, limits, and there's Ed Casey's and Edward Ralph essays as well. And I think the one amazing thing, what you also said, that the study of human ecology is a study of where you live, as it comes from the term oikos. The oikos also has a meaning of as a household, hence the oikos nomos, or economy. So it's a matter of human ecology tries to, or as I understood it, it's also a way of seeing the landscape as a household, and it implies, It implies therefore also not only taking and making care of the landscape, but actively engaging with it, because it's one question is how to live carefully in a landscape. The second question is how to live by the landscape, from the landscape. Therefore, there are questions of economy. It's a question of politics. And I think this is what's missing in this whole eco-narrative at the moment.
Yeah.
Either we are technocrats and we want to shoot rockets into the moon. Nevertheless, the planet is burning. I think it's a very, very interesting time, especially this week. Some cities across the pond are burning, and we are burning fuel to get us away from the burning cities. So I think it's also very important that what you put a finger on, that there are the world and the landscape and the nature. It's not a simple thing. It's a fucking complex stuff. Hence my question. What do you think about globalization?
I think through the time, definitely my thinking has changed. I think when I was introduced to it, it was introduced as something positive and
Interconnectedness
opening,
and openness,
and understanding, but it has heavy history, and the reasons behind why it is pushed so strongly for globalization, and I think there is this history of colonialism and the way today economy functions. So I think whenever we talk about globalization, there has to be recognition of that is actually one of the driving forces of a lot of issues that we are driving by this idea.
I'm asking you that question because you mentioned one amazing thing, and those who listen carefully, I think, and you did hear it, because you said that borders, and by your example of fences, also connect. If there's not a division in between, if the place is not divided, there's no possibility to actually connect it. And I think it kind of goes well with the narrative of globalization, because we need to embrace the commonality of difference. And how can we transform our thinking of building borders as fences, but building borders as connective zones? And I think it's also it's a material for a lecture I hope you will be doing soon. What else? I just want to pour out all the comments I have, because I feel like I need to. You talked about traces as well. All those remnants, those objects you find, especially in Darzeni landscape, and I thought that it's so amazing, because you can see those artifacts and remnants, those physical objects that tell stories about some old social material practices. Therefore, they embodies some knowledge maybe long lost, and it's so interesting that it's in the end, especially taking in mind this the vast amount and then level of our capacity to transform landscape, and it's a hybridized landscape already. It's very hard to find a natural landscape in the world at the moment. That if you want to see a university, if you want to see an archive, a living museum, it's there. It's already there. So the question: what's the difference between looking and seeing?
Okay, so I think then looking in the start, we can just start it as a physical act of just looking at it, and I think seeing is then bringing these different insights in of what the, for example, object or the landscape carries, and it can simply be done through not applying, but seeing it through time. So it just by itself, if you look at a picture, it's a picture. But when you acknowledge that it's in a time and in a place, you can imagine and maybe move these what you see. Then start seeing when you consider time, and this landscape then has a story when you see it. if I could explain it.
No,
It was thinking
it was
and not
an
words.
abstract question about abstract things we are, but that's the whole approach and the whole core idea of Cēsu University, to embrace and to engage with abstract questions, to question everything.
We have one question.
Okay.
From Helmut.
Amazing.
Where is the landscape, any landscape, located?
In itself. That's my answer. Tīna, what do you think?
Where is
Good
the
question,
landscape?
Helmut. I hope that you have the answer as well.
Well, just right away, I think that it's embedded in it's somewhere in a place. So, but when you cannot really divide, I think, those things, because one reflects the other, and yeah. So I would say in the landscape has. Well, actually, maybe when we start talking about like inner landscape and the digital landscape, it's not anymore really in a place, but it has to maybe be connected.
Mm-hmm.
When you said about when you go to a different landscape, you kind of start thinking through that landscape. Yeah.
If you want a simple answer, Helmut, then of course you must acknowledge that the landscapes we are talking about, they are the landscapes of this planet. Therefore, where are the place of the landscapes we are talking about on the planet Earth? But it's a simple answer. I think the interesting part would be to try to see, and as Jeff Malpas is trying to do that, to place landscape and to place the place. It's also a matter of language in itself. I think landscape is a concept of sui generis. Therefore, it's placed in itself. But then you need to ask the question, what is to be placed? So that's my counter question. Yeah, thank you, Helmut. Do we have more questions, or?
I think no.
Okay. Design into the next lectures, and the possibilities you just opened for exploration are huge. The habits of being, what is honesty in being in a landscape. Human ecology as sense-making project. I think it's also very important that human ecology can work as a platform, as a way of inquiry into the sense-making, because we need to more and more just to make a fucking sense what's happening around us. So it's image making, it's a place making on the next level, it's sense making, and I think you opened a door and invited us into the territory where so many things to be explored. And Cēsu University, as a synthesis of geography and design and philosophy, is saying thank you to you. And for those who don't know, I would say that Tīna is responsible for this whole project. And I will tell you a story, because last year, in the end of August, I did a lecture in Mala, where I met with Tīna. She was not invited there. She just came. And after the lecture, she came to me, because I think in that lecture I said some things about Cēsu as a city campus, Cēsu as a possible future university. And if Tīna hadn't do that, what was the correct grammar? Anyways, Tīna did what was needed to do for us to be able to have this moment at the moment. So take your courage, folks.